Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Go to audible.com/Daniel Schiffer or text Daniel Schiffer to 500-500 to get a free book and a 30-day free trial. Welcome to the second episode of Color Grading Your Videos, the show where I take footage you guys send to me and I color grade it right here on the channel. If you would like to submit your clips for a future episode, all of the instructions to do so will be in the description down below, but let's not waste any more time and get right into our first submission. So our very first submission of the night comes from Michael Moore, who's given us 3 clips here which I believe come from either a music video or some sort of fashion lookbook. And as you could probably tell, this footage is shot in a fairly flat picture profile, presumably S-Log2. So we'll have quite a bit of dynamic range to work with, and I think we can get a really cool look with this footage. So the first thing I'm going to do is add Color Finale Pro to our first clip, open the controls, and then I'm going to create a new color wheels layer. I'm going to open my scopes by hitting Command 7 on my keyboard, and I'm going to use the lumo waveform as a guide for my exposure. In very simple terms, the way this works is that if anything goes above this 100 line, you're gonna start losing some information in your highlights, and if anything goes below this 0 line, you're gonna lose some information in your shadows. So the first thing I'm going to do is adjust my gain slider, which controls my highlights, and I'm going to push it up until I'm just a little bit above that 100 line. As you can see, if I keep pushing, it starts to flatten out, and that is lost information, which is not what we want, so we're gonna bring that down until we're not losing any of that information. And the next thing I'm going to do is go all the way down to our lift, which controls our shadows. I'm gonna bring those down until we're almost at 0, but not quite, because if we go all the way to 0, things start to get crushed and your shadows turn into a complete black and you no longer have that information. So we're gonna go close to 0, but not all the way. I'm also going to pull down my midtones just slightly. And the next thing I wanna do is increase the saturation back into this clip. To do that, I'm going to take the saturation slider and just push it up to about 1.25. I think that looks about right. So what I wanna start doing is creating a look that I think will suit this video. So I wanna introduce some greens and yellows and some warm tones into this shot. So to do that, I'm going to create a curves layer, and I'm going to start introducing some contrast into the shot by making a simple S-curve in our master curve. So now that the image is looking kind of punchy, I'm going to lift up the bottom of the curve just slightly to fade out those shadows just a bit. And the next thing I'm going to do is start introducing green into the highlights of the shot by making a point here and dragging up. Now obviously we don't want our whole image to be green, so I'm going to make another point here and start pulling down to fix the rest of the clip. And I'm going to do the same thing in the red curve, only this time a little bit lower down on the curve itself. All right, so far I'm liking the way this is looking, but I do want to warm it up a little bit more. So I'm going to go into the blue curve and make a point right in the middle and start dragging that down to take blue out of the shot. Now here I'm just using my eye, pulling away until I've got the look that I think I want. And right there seems pretty good. And as you can tell, it's starting to resemble more of a film stock like a Fuji or Kodak. It has that sort of vintage look to it. And if we turn the curves layer off and then back on, now you can really see the difference that this layer actually made. And I think that the last color adjustment I want to make here is to introduce some red into the midtones by using the gamma color wheel. And I think that looks about right. So I am pretty satisfied with how this is looking so far. I'm actually gonna add a film grain effect to the footage as well, making sure that we're set to realistic grain and turning the amount down to 5. Now I do wanna make sure that our color grade is applied to the other 2 clips as well. So I'm going to click on the first clip, hit Command C to copy our effects, highlight the other 2 clips, go up to Edit, Paste Effects, and there you have it. Now this clip here looks pretty much exactly how I want it to look, but this clip here does look a little bit oversaturated. So I'm gonna go into the color wheels on this clip and just bring down the saturation so that it better matches the rest of our footage. And I think that's it. So here is the before and after of our first submission from Michael Moore. So our next submission comes from Matt and Christina, who have given us 2 clips which look like they were shot on vacation. And this will be a really good follow-up to our first submission because it's shot in very similar lighting conditions. The only difference being this stuff is not shot with a picture profile. So while the stuff before was shot using a log profile that was very flat, there is a lot more color and vibrance already in this footage, but maybe a little bit less detail available to us in those highlights. As you can see, even on this shot here, the sun is blown out a little bit. it. So really with this kind of footage, when you're not shooting with a picture profile, you could leave it as is and it already looks good because it's vibrant and saturated and it has a lot of contrast already. Now, of course, the way we do things around here is we want to make everything look as cinematic as possible. I'll also maybe try and salvage some of the detail that might still be in there that we can't see. And additionally, I'm going to try and really push that golden hour theme. Now, like always, the first thing I'm going to do is add Color Finale Pro to our first clip and open the controls. I'm going to create a new color wheels layer and I'm going to start off by pulling down in the gain channel to see how much of the highlights, if any, we can recover. So you'll notice that if I start pulling down, we are getting back some of that detail in the clouds, but if I keep pulling down, it really just makes the image darker and we're not actually getting any more detail. So I'm only going to pull down to the point where we get some detail back, but before it starts getting dark. And hopefully you can see that we did get some detail back in the clouds here as well as on this side. And you'll notice this if I turn the layer off and then back on. And obviously the overall image does look a little bit dark now. So to fix this, I'm actually going to push up in the gamma, bringing up some of those midtones. And then to counteract that, I'm going to pull down in the lift to add some contrast back into the shadows. So now if we turn this layer off and then back on, you'll see that our exposure in our subject doesn't really change all that much, but we do get a lot of detail back in that sky, which is what I was hoping for. So the next thing I want to do, and you might have already guessed, is add a curves layer and start making some contrast by doing an S curve in the master curve. Now already the clip is looking a little bit better than how we started, but I do want to really drive that golden hour feel because the clip is shot at golden hour. So we're going to try and enhance that. So I think I'm going to start in this red curve, making a point here and just pushing up a little bit to warm up those highlights. Now, of course, we don't want to make the entire clip completely red like this, so I'm going to make another point here and just pull down a little bit. And I'm also going to make a point in the blue curve here and pull down just a little, and this will also help warm up our footage. While we're at it, I'm going to make a very subtle decrease in the green curve because the skin tones did start to look a little bit green there. So there is only one thing left that I want to do to this clip to make that sunset more convincing, and that is to make our green plants here in the foreground look a little bit more golden and yellow from the sunlight hitting it. So I'm going to create a new vectors layer and go into our yellow channel, and I'm just going to move over the hue slightly and then raise our luminosity just a little bit. I'm also going to bump up the saturation slightly while we're at it. Now, one more minor adjustment just to finish it off. There is a little bit of a pinkish magenta tint over this clip, and I want to remove that. So I'm going to go into our gamma color wheel here and just pull pink out of the midtones slightly, just like that. So let's go ahead and select our clip and hit Command C and move over to our second clip and paste the effects. So this is already looking pretty good. I think the only thing really that I need to do is just bring down these midtones slightly and then maybe just bump up the shadows. So I think that's pretty much it for this color grade. So here is the before and after of our second submission. So before we continue with our last submission of the night, I'd like to quickly tell you about today's sponsor, which is Audible. So it occurred to me a while back while I was in my car driving home from a shoot, just how much time I was wasting every single week sitting in traffic and accomplishing nothing. So naturally, I was of course complaining about this to my family, and it was actually my dad who suggested to me that I should try listening to some audiobooks while I'm driving. I wish I took this advice sooner because now when I'm driving and I'm stuck in traffic, I'm actually learning a lot of new interesting things and hearing tons of fascinating stories. Now, if you're like me and you don't really have the time to sit down and read an actual book, I highly recommend you try out listening to an audiobook from Audible because not only is it more enjoyable, but you can actually do it while multitasking. So if your hands are full and you're cooking or cleaning, you can still be listening to an audiobook, making your time that much more productive. So currently I've actually been listening to Crushing It by Gary Vee, and it's extremely fascinating to hear how someone who's 20 years older than me is thriving in this new social media landscape. It is a really good listen, and if you're an aspiring creative or entrepreneur, I highly recommend you check this out. So go to audible.com/Daniel Schiffer or text Daniel Schiffer to 500-500 to get a free book and start your 30-day free trial today. All right, so our third and final clip comes from Sean Hernandez, who's given us this awesome clip of this guy doing a kickflip over the pyramid. And I want to take this in a different direction from the other stuff we've seen me do so far. And instead of doing a very like colorful, vibrant teal and orange look, I'm actually going to go for more of a flat, desaturated HBO documentary style, if that makes any sense. As always, I'm gonna add Color Finale Pro to our clip, just like that. Open our controls, and to do this, I'm actually gonna showcase how to color grade using LUTs. So a lot of the time when we apply LUTs or lookup tables, we think of it as a filter where you slap it on the footage and it's a one and done type thing. But this isn't really how LUTs work. So looking at this clip, I know exactly which one of my LUTs I want to use. In my vintage look LUT pack, you can see we have a bunch of options here with all sorts of different styles, but the one that I want to try out is this one here called Cassette. And as you can see, it really desaturates the footage, gives it an almost cooler tone, but the whole point of this LUT is to make the subject stand out because it preserves skin tones while sort of desaturating everything else. Now, right out the gate, this doesn't look exactly how I want it to look. I do want to increase the saturation maybe just a little bit, and I also want to brighten it up slightly as well. So what I'm going to do is make a new color wheels layer, and I'm going to drag it below our LUT layer, and I'm going to start making some adjustments. So the first thing I'm going to do is start increasing our exposure in the midtones using the gamma slider, and the reason I'm doing it in the gamma is because I don't want to blow out our shots by increasing the highlights. And that right there looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and decrease our highlights in the gain channel, and then lower our exposure in the shadows using the lift slider. This should give it a little bit more contrast, and now I'm just going to up the saturation by, let's say 1.1. So this is looking pretty good, but I still want to brighten it up just a little bit, so I'm going to go into the curves layer, just make a point in the master curve here, right in the middle, and just start lifting it up a little bit until I'm happy with how it looks. So the first thing we did was we added the LUT, then we made the exposure correction and added a little bit of saturation in the color wheels, and then we added a curves just to brighten it up a little bit. So that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Follow me on Instagram at daniel.schiffer, and as always, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.